Break them.
Alright, I got some complaints that I was playing too much indie rock, so here you go. A little Ice Cube throwback for you. Back to my days. Alright, today's lecture is 5.6. Deregulation should be a quick one. Let's get started. Deregulation basically means cutting back on regulation. Pretty self-explanatory. Alright, we know what regulation is. Regulation is when government tries to control something. For instance, what does government try to control? They try to control how much businesses pollute the air. And they have a regulatory agency. What's that agency called? The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Well, let's say that perhaps there are many people that argue the government regulates too much. And they would be advocates for deregulation, or cutting down on the amount of government regulation. Let's talk about a couple places that have been deregulated. Starting with the airlines. Back before 1978, the airlines were heavily regulated by the Civil Aeronautics Board, and the airlines were actually told how much they could charge prices for tickets, and so every airline charged the same price for a ticket, depending on a distance. And eventually, in 1978, Congress decided to take a step back and actually deregulate the airline industry and allow them to charge whatever rates they wanted and let the market decide. That's kind of been a theme of this unit, that phrase, let the market decide. So what do you think is going to happen to the airline industry? Will this be a good move or a bad move? Let's take a look and see what happened, what the effects were. So there was competition, and when you're charging different prices and maybe you're not fit to compete, sometimes you go out of business. So some airlines went out of business because they couldn't compete. One of them is Pan Am. You ever see that movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio? He works for Pan Am in that movie, and I always wondered, where is Pan Am today? So I looked it up when I was doing these notes, and apparently it went out of business after we deregulated the airlines. Some smaller cities lost airline service because if you're a business, you're not going to go open an airport in a place that's not giving you a lot of customers, okay? So perhaps airlines, for example, Ontario Airport, probably a lot of airlines would have left Ontario Airport because they might have not seen it as profitable to run out of there. But on the plus side, it seems like I have it actually out of order, so I'll go to C. There has been some concern that airlines have cut corners in order to increase their profits. Maybe cut corners in maintenance. I don't know about you, but today when I fly, you're not going to get food really anymore unless you're flying an international flight or unless you pay for it. When I grew up and you flew on an airline, you always got a meal. But after 9/11, in order to save money, they stopped doing that. So it's just drinks and pretzels only. On the plus side, what can we say is good about deregulation? And perhaps this is the most important thing. The price that people pay for tickets has gone way, way down. So more and more people are able to travel. So let's look in, say, 1980, right around the time that this is happening. The average price of an airline ticket, adjusted for inflation, is $600. Today, it is half of that, all right? About $300 to $350 today. So we have seen a dramatic drop in the price of airline tickets, so you could argue that's a pretty awesome thing. So deregulation shut down some airports. Airlines have started to cut corners, but they compete with each other and they fight hard to offer the lowest fare so people will want to fly with their airline. Let's look at another field that was deregulated. Telecommunications, with the Telecommunications Act of 1996. This is like phone, cable, those wires that go under the ground. They were allowed to compete with each other more. So before it was much more heavily regulated, and you pretty much had one choice of a company for cable and internet. Well, now with this act, they could compete with each other, and so this has probably been a good thing. Also, part of this act Not super important, but I thought I'd mention that TV makers were forced to install a V chip that could allow parents to block off like bad content. Like TV mature adults. TV MA up in the corner. It allowed TV makers to block off, so a parent could say, "Don't allow my kid to watch any of that type of show." So here's Clinton excited about the V chip, and here's a kid scared to look, and the parent who's like, "Oh my." I found this on the internet. I thought it was funny. All right. Deregulation. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? It's kind of up to you. Can you picture what the parties would think about this? How would a Republican feel about deregulation? Would he be more in favor of it or more against it? He would be more in favor of it. And a Democrat would be more against it. Okay, so deregulation restores natural market forces in pricing, efficiency, and resources. We saw airlines competed with each other. Some couldn't survive. Some went out of business. But the ones that did stuck around and lowered the price of their tickets, which is what we do want. So it encourages competition. It encourages innovation. All right, think about Xbox and PlayStation 3. Because they both exist, they try to outdo each other by having the most innovative product. So that's the market taking over. This is a lot of econ stuff here. And it prevents government agencies from being captured by the businesses they're supposed to regulate. It lets the government step away, and I think when the government steps away, that can be good for everybody as long as the consumer doesn't hurt. And it lowers costs for the industries, lowers prices for consumers. If there was no Xbox, PlayStation would probably charge $500 for their system, but because there is an Xbox, they're charging $400 to try to get customers. Okay. If they're both have their prices set by the government, well then they're not going to be competing necessarily so strongly with each other. What are the negatives of deregulation? Well, we've talked about it in previous notes. I would say the negatives is sometimes there's like a total collapse of the system. California deregulated their power when I was in high school, and it was a big nightmare. It went very terribly, and it was a big mistake. I would say, and looking back, we realized that we screwed that up. Under Ronald Reagan, he deregulated, I believe, certain types of banks when he first started, and that was a bit of a nightmare. A lot of the banks had trouble dealing with the deregulation. So, let's see. In addition, due to our federal system, states will continue to regulate. So, just because the federal government doesn't regulate something doesn't mean that California is not going to. And that creates a lot of confusion because you have different guidelines. Like, here's the federal guidelines that you need to do for environmental protection, but here's the state guideline. For instance, you know how we talked about Obama signed a law that said that cars need to get better gas mileage? Well, California did the same thing. They actually have, I think, a higher requirements for gas mileage than Obama does. So that's any car that sells in the state has to deal with our regulations in addition to the federal regulations, and that can be kind of annoying for them. So that's it. See how quick and painless that was? Have a nice day. See you in class on Tuesday.